For this class, we're going to talk about what is, for me personally, one of the most interesting topics, and that's the idea of competitive dynamics and how is it that firms go against each other and what are the outcomes of that. Let me tell you a little bit about how this chapter came to be in this particular textbook. I'm very familiar with this textbook and its evolutions. In its earliest editions, it didn't have a discussion of competitive dynamics. It was unique for that, and it turned out that that was a limiting factor for the textbook. So they put the material in after the textbook had been established to a couple of earlier editions. Unfortunately, in my opinion, they decided to place the discussion of competitive dynamics in the back of their general chapter on entrepreneurship. And they say basically, well, sometimes companies enter into new markets or new products, and that's a competitive attack against existing people in that business, and that's how they launch into it. I agree with that. It's not that that's a bad setup. It's just that there's a lot of things that aren't in this textbook that are in others that I'm going to talk about. I'd like you to see the quote at the bottom of the slide. This is the guy that used to be the CEO of Bank of America, and he said this before the bank crash. All the banks started to get into trouble in the 2008 economic downturn. And his comment was, he was saying this to a group of Bank of America executives, this is a time when I think we could really go for the jugular. We could really take some market share. And that's really a lot of what this discussion is about, is how does one firm improve vis-a-vis its competitors. Oh, and you like my Dilbert cartoon there. Some of you are going to be a little uncomfortable with this particular discussion because it's going to talk about beating another guy, not just through your strategy necessarily, but by, or I should say it is through your strategy, but beating them because you're specifically attacking someone else. And to some folks that's uncomfortable, but it's the way it is. So I want you to think about this particular problem. What I'm depicting for you is that on the left-hand side of the chart, this is your industry as it is. You and competitor A are about the same size. Competitor B is a much smaller competitor, but still a worthy competitor. You can see that right now the industry profits are about 100 million for the three companies. Unfortunately, your share of the pie is smaller than that of competitor A. So you're out there walking to your board of directors going, we're number two, we're number two. Let's assume for a second that you decide that going around, we're number two, isn't where you want to be, and you launch a series of competitive attacks. And that shifts you to the picture that you see on the right side of the slide. Now, you in fact are number one in the industry. You and company A didn't downsize, so to speak. You just launched a series of competitive attacks. Your profits went from 35 million to 30 million, but you were able to get in and gut some of company A's profit pools, and their profits went from 50 million to 25 million. Competitor B suffered a little bit, but again, they were a little bit smaller player. And the question is, which of these outcomes would you prefer? You can make a case for both ways, incidentally. It's not a slam dunk, and some of it's going to be personal taste. This is the outcome, though, in many cases of competitive dynamics. The industry profit pool does shrink, but different companies sometimes assume the lead. The first question you have to ask, though, when we talk about competitive dynamics is, who is my competitor really? Is it all the people that we think it is? I used an old chart that shows strategic groups in the auto industry. And the point is that a lot of auto manufacturers don't compete with Ferrari and Lamborghini. A lot of the other competitors, and I think Hyundai and Kia deserve to be a part of the major competitors, they're all there kind of jousting it out. But I got a feeling Ferrari doesn't really care what Ford does because they're not really viewed as a competitor, even though they're both automobile manufacturers. There's a great quote in the textbook by Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, where he talks about we can't react to everything that happens in the industry. And for example, he said, we don't react directly to what YouTube does. It's a different model. It's an advertising supported model. We're a subscriber-based model, so we don't see them as a direct competitor. Incidentally, YouTube, I saw, is considering allowing people to charge to have their channels watched on YouTube. So maybe their model is shifting a little bit. But he said, at least when he made the quote, they don't worry about YouTube because they don't see them as a competitor because they have a different business model, even though you can make the case that they are. So you have to figure out who's your competitor. Why? Because this helps you figure out who you really have to watch. Now, this is a slide that isn't in, this is from another textbook. And so I'd like you to try to call this slide up and look at it and see about some of the conditions that are involved in competitor analysis, because they're very important. What do we think their assumptions are? What do you think their business strategy is? What do we think their strengths and weaknesses are? All these things factor into analyzing a competitor. And you want to do that because ultimately in competitive dynamics, what you would like to be able to do is predict what other people are going to do before they do it and take advantage of that. And I'm going to make a prediction. I hope I'm wrong, but some of you at the end of the BSG game will not have a very good fingerprint on what you think your competitors are likely to do. Those will be the teams that finish towards the bottom. Almost always, the teams that finish the top 1 or 2 or 3 in the BSG, their competitor analysis is so good, they almost know what the competitors are going to do better than the competitors themselves, because they don't realize that they've fallen into a predictable pattern, or that there are certain obvious things that they're missing and they're not doing certain obvious steps. I hope I'm wrong. I hope every one of you do a good job of analyzing your competitors. So, what are some of the things that are done with competitor analysis? A lot of the material for competitor analysis is gained through open source material. And some of it is a little bit more purposeful that some folks are going to be uncomfortable with. Some folks are going to be uncomfortable with. Sometimes you begin to flirt on the edges of the law. So let's talk about this. Is it fair to talk to a company's suppliers and their customers? Most people are going to say yes. But remember, when somebody is willing to talk with you about your competitor, you have to assume that they're willing to talk with your competitor about you. So that's a little bit of a slippery slope there. How about going shopping at their stores, seeing what they're doing, looking what they charge for various stuff? Is that fair? It is, and it's commonly done. In fact, I just read in a recent Inc. magazine a diary of a person that specializes in competitive intelligence. And one of the things that he is sometimes assigned to do, because he's a contractor, he will go in and he will talk to store managers. And he will go and visit store managers in lots of different stores, trying to get them to talk. In the article, the guy talked about one rainy night in Atlanta, Georgia. He got a very chatty store manager that he was just able to extract a lot of information that, when combined with what he was able to find through other sources, gave him a pretty good insight into that company's retail strategy. Incidentally, he was very careful to point out that he never deceived the store manager about what he was up to. He didn't say, "I'm working for your competitors." He said, "I'm doing business research." Surfing their websites, again, commonly done. In fact, I had a student in one of my first semesters here at Midwestern that worked for Grainger, and she was telling how Grainger had figured out that their leading competitor had automated bots that were aggressively surfing the Grainger website, and basically they were trying to figure out their pricing algorithm, and they were successful in so doing. And so when they got a price request from a potential customer, they were able to go in and see with pretty high probability, pretty high accuracy, what Grainger was likely to quote for that price, and then were slightly underpricing Grainger on everything. Grainger, it took them a while to notice it, and then they had to make some adjustments based on that. So again, that happens, and it's considered perfectly legal. How about going through a competitor's trash? As stinky as it sounds, it is in fact completely legal. When something goes out into the street, into a dumpster, it's fair game. How about trying to hire away their superstar employees? Again, that is a common practice. What's illegal, though, is to expect that superstar employee to come and tell you about what companies are, their former company is going to do. And this is where you'll sometimes see this get into the courts and litigation with accusations like that. So it's illegal to hire away the employees, but not for the purpose of getting them to quote unquote rat on their former employer and what they're intending to do. And then what about going on a fake job interview? Sending somebody to go talk to a company as though they're applying for a job. This starts to get into really shaky grounds legally, and for me personally, gets into clear grounds ethically where I'm not willing to do something like that, because I believe that is consciously deceitful, and I wouldn't agree with that. However, Bill Gates once said that he routinely went to the Google website, the careers website, to see who they were interviewing for, and he knew when they were moving into Microsoft space with some Google Docs and things like that, he knew they were getting ready to do that because he saw who they were hiring based on their job postings. How about if you accidentally come across some proprietary documents of a competitor? Is it legal to make copies of that? The answer is no. In fact, Boeing got caught doing that a little under a decade ago and paid a very healthy fine. So this next chart is a very busy one, but we can cover a lot of ground there. And they divvy up two ways that companies become rivals. They either are rivals in the marketplace because they're going after the same customer, or they're rivals even though they're serving different customer bases because they need the same resources. I'm going to be honest with you. The resources thing is probably legitimate, but very, very, very infrequent. What is common, and where I'm going to spend the rest of my time, is talking about companies that compete for the same customers. I'm coming up on the end of my time for the first video, so I'm going to stop here and we'll pick it up in the next segment. See you in a minute.